This plane vanished over the ocean, and 4 people were never supposed to come back. The date was March 3, 2009. At exactly 6:41 a.m., Helios Cargo Flight 917 lifted off from Reykjavik, Iceland, bound for Halifax, Canada. It wasn't a passenger flight. Only 14 people were on board, 6 crew members and 8 technicians escorting specialized cargo across the North Atlantic. The flight was expected to be routine and uneventful, but 3 hours later, while cruising at 34,000 feet, the aircraft entered a violent storm system. Turbulence shook the cabin like a living thing. Alarms screamed in the cockpit, and then a deafening metallic explosion tore through the plane. One engine failed, then another. Captain Elliot Crane fought to keep control, but the aircraft was rapidly losing altitude over endless open ocean. With systems collapsing and no land in sight, he made a desperate decision. He aimed the falling plane toward an abandoned offshore weather station, a rusted steel tower left behind decades earlier, standing alone in the Atlantic like a forgotten monument. At 7:19 a.m., the plane struck the structure, its wings tearing away before the fuselage slammed into the sea. When consciousness returned, the storm was still raging. Out of 14 people, only 9 were alive. They were injured, freezing, and clinging to twisted wreckage as waves crashed around them. Above them rose the skeletal weather station, groaning under the force of the wind and sea. One by one, they climbed corroded ladders with bleeding hands, dragging themselves onto the platform. Below them, the ocean swallowed the remains of the aircraft. Within minutes, every trace of the crash was gone. To the world, they had vanished. The tower was barely holding together. Broken rooms, shattered windows, rusted floors, and no electricity greeted them. There was no radio, no food stockpile, and no fresh water. Only wind, iron, and endless water in every direction. At first, they believed rescue would arrive within days. That hope died quickly. On the 3rd night, the temperature plunged, and they burned scraps of insulation to survive the cold. By morning, Harris, the flight engineer, was dead from hypothermia. There was no way to keep his body, no ground to bury him. They lowered him into the sea and watched the water close over him without a sound. That was when reality truly set in. This tower was not shelter. It was a slow execution. Fresh water became their greatest enemy. Melted ice made them sick due to salt contamination. Eventually, they built a crude rain collector from torn plastic and bent metal. When rain finally fell, they cried as if witnessing a miracle. Each person was allowed only a few mouthfuls a day. Hunger hollowed them out quickly. Their bodies weakened, their faces sharpened, and conversations faded into silence. On the 19th day, during a violent storm, Victor slipped near the edge of the platform. A single wave slammed into him and dragged him screaming into the darkness. After that, no one went near the edge again. Weeks passed, then months. Skin cracked and bled, hair fell out in clumps, and eyes sank deep into skulls. Loneliness began to rot their minds. Maya talked to the tower at night. Ruth stopped speaking altogether. Owen cried for his mother until his voice failed. On one brutal night, Noah admitted the truth. The emergency beacon had only transmitted for 12 hours after the crash. If no one had found them by then, the world had already declared them dead. Hope began to decay, slowly and painfully. On the 112th day, Samir collapsed. Starvation had destroyed his body from the inside. They held his hand as his breathing faded, and when it was over, an unthinkable thought filled the room. Food. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. They didn't cross that line, but humanity itself felt dangerously thin. Survival had become mechanical, stripped of dignity and comfort. On the 209th day, while scavenging the highest level of the tower, Lena found something hidden behind a rusted panel. An old manual emergency transmitter, cracked and corroded, but intact. It required power they didn't have. In a final gamble, they dismantled every remaining batteries from watches, flashlights, and broken devices. They wired them together and activated the transmitter. At first, nothing happened. Hours passed.
Then a faint green light blinked once and died. They collapsed, convinced it was their last failure. 5 days later, on the morning of day 214, Maya noticed something unnatural on the horizon. A moving shadow against the water. A ship. It was far away, almost unreal. They had no flares and barely enough strength to stand. Captain Elliot climbed to the highest level, removed his jacket, set it on fire, and waved it through the freezing air with the strength of a dying man. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then the ship slowed. It turned. A horn echoed across the ocean. They fell to their knees as the sound carried over the water. Some laughed, some cried, and some could only stare in disbelief. Only 4 survived: Elliot, Lena, Maya, and Ruth. When they were pulled onto the rescue vessel, their legs collapsed beneath them. They weighed less than children and looked like ghosts. The world later called it the Iron Silence Incident. 214 days lost between sea and sky. They never truly returned to normal life, but they returned alive. And sometimes, that alone is the greatest victory a human being can achieve.